Hi y'all, we're talking about summarizing, which is the practice of explaining what someone else is saying. This is a key skill in academic writing, and as we move through the semester, it's one of the areas where we'll be spending a lot of time. At the end of the semester, we'll have done a lot of work with summarizing and discussing ideas from other people, telling our own stories and developing our own ideas, and bringing together these different ways of writing. You'll see summary writing anywhere you see reading and writing in college courses. History papers will ask you to summarize and explain both primary and secondary texts. Science courses will ask you to summarize experimental data, both your own and others. Social and behavioral sciences will have you summarize research studies. Workforce and vocational courses will have you explain instructions and user manuals. Basically, the core ideas here are going to be something we use a lot in this class, but it's also information that I hope helps you in other courses. When we summarize, we're going to use these 6 strategies, and I'm going to take the rest of this presentation to explain them. The strategies here are playing the believing game, understanding the structure of the source we're summarizing, knowing the rhetorical situation of the source we're summarizing, knowing why we're summarizing, avoiding listing, and using signal phrases. So, when we begin working with a text, our first job is to do what rhetoric scholar Peter Elbow calls play the believing game. That means we need to understand what the author is saying as they intend it. This can be really difficult, but it's key to try to read texts in a way that withholds judgment, at least at first. Believe that the author made their argument in good faith, and that it's worth understanding even if you disagree. Also really key, don't assume you understand if you think you agree. Your goal should be to write a summary so that, at least at first, your audience can't immediately see your viewpoint. There's a slight caveat here that when you approach a text by a bad faith actor, a text that is misinformation, or a text that openly engages in these ism-type arguments, you might want to think twice about playing the believing game with that kind of text. The next thing we need to do is understand the structure of the text we want to summarize. That means we need to be able to see how the author put together their text, and I suggest you do this by reverse outlining the text in question. Clarify the author's thesis, main point, and look for the key points that they make and how they relate back to the thesis. Understand the conclusion, and particularly the answer to the questions, so what? Why do they believe this is important to their audience? And what now? What do they want their audience to do with this information? Making a reverse outline like this ensures that we're giving a clear explanation of the big picture. Going without makes us much more likely to focus in on the wrong stuff. Along with making an outline, we need to make sure we understand the rhetorical situation, especially when we start comparing 2 different sources. Understanding the difference in their audiences, for example, can really help us explain things clearly. As we're preparing our summary and figuring out what we want to focus on, it's also really important to have read and form some ideas of what we want to say about it. Sometimes this will be about a specific assignment you have, but sometimes you'll be writing with an open response, and you'll just need to get a sense of which things are most interesting to you. Understanding this will help you know which details you need to make sure to mention in your summary. If there's one section you most want to focus on, you can add the most detail to that part of your summary. You won't ignore other things. You'll use your outline and give an idea of the whole structure, but when you can focus in on what fits your needs. Doing all of these things, outlining, knowing rhetorical situations, and knowing why we're summarizing especially, will help us avoid listing. A listing summary may run through every single thing from an article in a really boring way, using a lot of phrases like, then they say, and then they say, and after that they say. List summaries can also do a really poor job of differentiating between main ideas and details, and may get accused of plagiarism for following the original structure too closely. So we're going to follow a basic pattern with summaries that will help us avoid this. So when we write a summary, we're of course going to begin by reading and rereading, by making an outline and understanding the author's points. And then we're going to put aside the text. The first sentence of a summary should name the author. We really like either full names or last names in academic writing. We do not like just first names. And give the main point, that is the author's thesis, even if it's not the first thing they said. Then share their main points. This might be 1 or 2 sentences that are a bit listy, but we want to give a basic idea of the structure of the essay. Then you can choose the specific details to share based on your needs. These can be put after you give the basic structure of the article, or they could be combined. If an author is using narrative, that is telling their story or someone else's story to share some points, we want to be clear about that. If they're citing research, we want to be clear about that. Either at the beginning or the end, make sure you express the author's so what and what now. This slide gives you some examples for how you'd structure the first sentence of a summary of this slide presentation. We want to name the author, that's me, and express the main point and maybe the purpose of the text. Finally, we need to use signal phrases, which are variations of basically they say, which signals that the words and ideas you're using aren't your own. We want to use a variety of active verbs like they say, express, argue, implore, explain, inform. You have a handout of many different possible signal phrases. The key is just to make sure that you're showing proper attribution of ideas. Here are some sample sentences that use signal phrases, and you have more on that handout on D2L. I have 2 quick examples of what it might look like to write a very short summary of this presentation. In both these examples, I'm using a first sentence that expresses the author's name, point, and purpose, a second sentence that expresses the general structure and main points, and a third, and more if I need them, sentence that begins expressing an idea I want to specifically respond to. This is a pretty short presentation, so maybe 3 sentences is all I need. If I have a longer, more complex essay to summarize, I'll probably want to spend more time discussing details that were interesting. And that's the basic of writing summaries. Remember that any time you're writing a summary in this class or another, there's always some kind of purpose behind it. Either your teacher will give you a way to respond, or you'll be free to respond to the things that interest you. So your goal is to quickly explain the whole structure and main ideas, and then to focus in on the details that you want to respond to.